right, welcome to another edition of the Behind the Point Spread presented by Doc Talk Sports. I'm Travis Justice. If you have not started to subscribe to our YouTube channel, please take the time to do so because a lot of good stuff up there on YouTube. In fact, earlier this week, Dr. Rob and I released what was our interview with Frank Solich. So if you want to hear from Coach Frank Solich, you can do that by visiting our YouTube page and subscribing and watch all our podcasts. Of course, we release our podcasts weekly, and we talk about the upcoming game for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and we also can see the doc's diagnosis and all sorts of good stuff. So let's get started tonight. We're going to bring in Scott Spreitzer and Dr. Rob Zadiska. Rob, I got to start with Scott. What the hell's going on in Las Vegas? Because you got
that's the same thing.
you got a team that's 3-0, and you have a guy that just ups and quits on the team.
Yeah, it's a weird situation. Takes stuff like this to see that Las Vegas actually cares about college football once in a while. And this is really odd. Okay, so they go out and they get this quarterback transfer from Holy Cross, Sluka, who played for Holy Cross last year. And there were some schools that wanted the guy. So he comes out here. He's not a passing quarterback at all. I mean, he's an athlete posing as a quarterback, 43% completion percentage through his first 3 games, but he picks him up and he puts him down. And so this week, we learned, 2 days ago, that he says that he was promised $100,000 and that it didn't look like it was going to happen, that he was getting $3,000 a month to be at UNLV. And so he told the coaching staff and his teammates, I'm out of here. I'm gone. You're not going to pay me the $100,000. UNLV comes back and says, there was no agreement made that we know of. And, they stated
technically the school can't make that agreement.
Exactly. And that's what UNLV did. They stated that it was actually unlawful or illegal to do what Sluka claimed they did. He said it was an assistant coach. They asked him, do you have proof? Is it in writing? Well, no, it's not. Now, he might be young and stupid, but I also think he's like 23 years old and went to Holy Cross, so he's not a kid. But the bottom line is, if he can prove it, I'm on his side 100%. But if he can't prove it, and this is how you treat your teammates, get the hell out of here. We don't need that. And I think UNLV
didn't one of the running backs announce that he was leaving too?
It was like the 4th string running back. Announced he's leaving. Well, I shouldn't say technically the 4th leading rusher, but he got about 19 carries in 3 games. So it wasn't like he was a guy who hadn't carried the football. And he did score a touchdown against Kansas. So I don't want to make it sound like he's a nobody. He hasn't been vocal. It was basically Sluka. And so, again, my thought was if you can prove that this was promised, prove it. Everybody will be on your side in this town. Everybody. Odom said, what he said, that basically it hasn't happened. It didn't happen. And so you've got this he said, she said, or he said situation going on. They've got a really good linebacker, UNLV. And he used to play at Arkansas, and he's in his 2nd year now and final year at UNLV. He's going to be in the NFL next year, no doubt about it. And he's one of the best linebackers in college football. And he came out, I think it was last night or today, and he said, it's about time that Haj Williams gets to start instead of Sluka. And before the season, Odom came out, the coach, he said, we have 3 quarterbacks who are equal. If we can't get what we need out of this offense, I have no problem bringing in a new quarterback. So you've got better passers sitting behind Sluka before this week. He was a fantastic running quarterback. They didn't beat Kansas just because of Sluka. They beat Kansas because Kansas couldn't hold on to the football, and they had a quarterback who couldn't throw it to the right colored jersey, and they made a lot of mistakes. So as far as how UNLV does moving forward, that mental thing we've talked about before, where their head's going to be, I think they're going to be ready to go for Fresno. And if you liked UNLV at 3.5, 4, I certainly believe you got to like him at 1.5 now that the line dropped. Because again, if Odom, and there's no reason to doubt Barry Odom since he's been fantastic. If he comes out and says we have 3 equal quarterbacks before the season begins, I kind of trust his judgment.
Well, I kind of trust the linebacker there when you've got because that's an indication of internal dynamics on the team and sort of that locker room culture.
Sure.
If the starting linebacker is making the comment, so whatever you said, it's like, hey, it's about time Haj gets a chance to start.
Right.
It sounds like there's maybe a shift towards a preferred team culture or preferred locker room culture, that they're with the guys that the rest of the guys on the team want to see start, which again, if all of these quarterbacks were equal and Hodge is as good as Sluka, then it's probably a move in the right direction and you're going to end up with a better, more cohesive team going forward.
We got a comment in for you, Scott. James says, "Are your picks tonight all a verbal agreement?"
Here's what I like.
Okay, that's a great comment.
You guys got some of the best viewers and say some of the best things. I can't remember who it is. So if he's watching tonight, somebody texted in or tweeted, texted, whatever you want to call it. Said last week we were talking about Nebraska, and he goes, "Are we sure that the Nebraska defensive backs can hang with these Illinois receivers?" And reading between the lines, I don't think he thought Nebraska's defenders could. And I hope he's listening, and I hope he chimes in, because you deserve a pat on the back when you're watching shows and you ask a great question like that. But I love that question to start off the show. That's great stuff.
Rob, we do have one for you, and that is from Roger, who says the casual pint says hi. So if they're all watching at the casual pint tonight, just let you know, Rob's thinking about you, and he's drinking a beer in your honor.
They're my friends
over at the casual pint. Before we dive into the picks, I do want to stay on this subject just for a little bit, because I've been talking about it a lot. This won't be the first time we see this, and it isn't the first time. It's not the last. This is why I think you need transparency in this and actually written contracts, right? I mean, absolutely. Everybody needs to know who's on the up and up, because you just can't come and say, well, he promised me this. Yeah. Well, if the head coach didn't make the offer and an assistant coach did, who didn't have the authority to do so, there's no offer there, right? I mean, this is why we need actual contracts and transparency in the NIL space.
Well, and I guess what I was just going to say here is it's the assistant coach might be echoing what
fair.
Well, I mean, does UNLV have a collective, Scott?
Yes.
Do you know?
Okay.
We do. Yeah. So, I mean, he might merely be echoing what the collective is telling him to say to the recruits.
Sure.
And possibly. So I've been around this just enough now to know that there's conversations happening. There's no way it doesn't happen. I mean, because we've asked the question, hey, how does the collective know what recruits the coaching staff is going after? How do they actually know? There's conversations happening, and it's happening at every single school in the country.
Let me ask this much, though, because NIL is name, image, likeness. All right, so that shouldn't have anything to do with the university other than, hey, Dr. Rob, or at the time, no doctor in front of your name, but hey, Rob, we want you to come play for us. If, Billy Bob's Burger Bonanza wants to put your face on their billboard, you get that money. It's up to you. But he's actually talking about like a pay-per-view or pay-per-play situation.
Exactly. 100%.
And there's got to be some kind of, clear cut in bold, in Braille, whatever you want to call it, rule that says there's nil, not necessarily pay for play, right?
And that's why this has turned into what it is because the NC2A stepped back and did not do any kind of structure to this. They basically said, fine, you want to go do what you want to do, everybody go do what you want to do.
Right.
And what ended up happening was players and businesses and boosters and I'm sure agents and everybody else got together and said, okay, well, there's literally no rule book here now. I mean, everybody kept using the phrase, it's the Wild West out there. It was. And there's still very minimal regulations and rules that govern a lot of this. And it's been almost governed more so by like, what are the extreme cases? And so that's why every time I look at this, I keep thinking at some point, I mean, we're basically in a sort of a de facto free market salary system. And so, okay, we're going to pay you what you think you're worth and what we think you might be worth. We're going to come together and get a number, and that's what we're going to pay you to come here to play. Yeah. It's a free market salary system.
It is, but I like what Mike Gundy said at Oklahoma State. Once the season starts, there's no negotiating. It's all
Absolutely.
you're
no,
done.
and I get it, but we just saw a situation right here at UNLV where there was 100% sort of a kind of maybe de facto negotiation that went sour and did not go in the quarterback's favor, and he was like, "Fine, I'm out of here."
That's why you get something signed on a piece of paper that's
But it's
legally
also
binding.
it's also one of the reasons why at some point, going back to what several people we've talked, when you look at like what Connor Orr's told us, Doug Ewald, some of these other guys we've spoken with over the last couple of years, the thing they've continually echoed is that at some point this is going to come under the university umbrella. Let me rephrase it. It's going to come under the athletic department umbrella, and these kids are going to be university or athletic department employees, and you're going to see more of an employment-based system, which is really what it kind of is right now, just on everything but on paper.
I'm just hoping these young guys that are getting big paychecks right now are thinking somebody's teaching them about the IRS. I really do. This could be such a mess in a couple of years. And I really hope the schools, you go out and get that 5-star player and he makes $3 million off of nil and all that kind of stuff, that you have a department that is saying, hey man, we're going to sit you down and teach you everything you need to know about paying taxes, because this could be a huge blow up mess in a couple of years. But isn't it like the NC2A? You go from not paying anything when you should at least give $1,000 a month or whatever to the absolute other extreme. It's such a mess. They got to come up with guidelines. It's got to be presented as easy as possible for everybody to understand. And then you don't have something like this. And my thought is this: somebody opened their mouth and said something to Sluka, somebody who doesn't have, it's above his pay grade to say something like that. There was nothing on paper. There was nothing that was official. Otherwise, UNLV, do you know what this town is? This town's made of money. $100,000. They're going to, bitch about that and get all this bad press. I mean, they spend $20 million a day on advertising, so, and UNLV's got money. There's no doubt about it. They've just been a little selfish with it over the years. But the bottom line is if this was in writing, there's some proof. They're not going to haggle over $100,000 over a player.
But I guarantee you nobody puts this stuff in writing.
Oh, they don't. That's the crazy thing. They will now.
They should, but
now.
I mean, but that's why I think at some point it becomes an employment system.
Yeah,
it will,
and it does get put into writing.
That's why you need collective bargaining and and transparency, and both sides know what happens. And
you need an agent.
Yeah, you do need an agent. But this, Rob, in the NFL, if your agent calls Jacksonville and says, well, the Cowboys are offering Rob, $1 million a year, they can't lie like that. Right now, you have a lying system. Well, you know what? Nebraska's offering this kid 1.5, and the coach has to go, well, either I got to match that or I don't. There's got to be transparency with that when it comes to who's getting paid and who's paying what. Hey, let's take a look. Don't forget, if you want to work with Scott Spreitzer, and you're going to hear from him all night long, you can text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit Doc Sports. That's docsports.com. Sign up for the free 60 on the upper left-hand side of the website. This is an interactive show, so if you want to give us a call, you can do that at 402-543-5556. That's 402-543-5556. Here are the games we are talking about tonight. We're going to start in the National Football League with the Chiefs and the Chargers. Then we're going to move on to the college game. We got Illinois and Penn State, Kentucky and Ole Miss, Georgia and Alabama, and of course Nebraska will wrap things up for us tonight as they take on Purdue. So again, there's the number 402-543-5556. If you don't want to call in, you can always just leave a comment in the comment section, and we'll be ready to go with that. So let's start tonight with the National Football League. This is an intriguing game. You've got the Chiefs and you've got the Chargers. And Scott, I think this is Chiefs going on the road here, and the Chargers coming off that first loss of the season. I believe this is an intriguing game.
It definitely is. I mean, and the line was 3 before Sunday, and then Herbert gets injured. The line got as high as 9. It's now Kansas City -7 as we speak. If Herbert can't go, it'll be Taylor Heineke, who everybody recognizes that name from starting several games in his NFL career, and he'll be backed by Easton Stick, another familiar name. I think
he's a Creighton Prep kid.
Yeah, exactly. And he's played a little bit in the NFL. But the bottom line is that I think if Heineke ends up having to play a good chunk of this game, or maybe the entire game, I think Harbaugh, Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator, I think these are guys who can develop a game plan to benefit Heineke and the Charger offense. Kansas City's been sneaking by opponents, allowing those teams to make costlier mistakes than they have. They're middle of the pack in total offense, passing offense, rushing offense, -4 turnover margin. Mahomes has nearly as many picks as touchdown passes. And the passing game has mainly been underneath so far this season. Hasn't been a lot of deep stuff, short stuff right now. The defense is 28th against the pass and middle of the pack against the run. And I know you could say they played a couple of the nice teams during this time, but here we go again. KC's ripe, but can you beat KC? Can you overcome that mystique of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes across the line of scrimmage from you? Another thing that makes this tough, because I was going to come in here and jump on the Chargers this week, even without Herbert. Here's the problem.
That -8, that's a big line.
Yeah, it's 7 in a lot of books now in Vegas, but there are 8s out there. But I was going to say also what makes it tough, the Chargers, their tackles, Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, they've both been downgraded to doubtful earlier Thursday. Joey Bosa's questionable. They won't have Derwin James. He appealed the 1-game suspension. It was upheld today by the NFL. So as much as I like what Harbaugh is already doing, and as much as I like the Bolts, I can't be on them this week. I got to pass, because you know what's best for this? Wait and see as long as you can to see if these tackles are going to be able to play. Both being doubtful on Thursday afternoon tells me they're probably not. And if you've got a backup quarterback, you've got tackles who are missing or banged up, it makes it tough to back a team going against Kansas City, even with those 7 or 8 points. But again, late Wednesday into Thursday, that number started dropping a little bit. So and that's sharp action. That's not public action.
Are the Chiefs just one of those teams we're just waiting to break out, or do we think this is going to be a down year for the Chiefs? Because you're right, they've been squeaking by.
I won't say a down year for Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, as long as one's coaching and one's playing quarterback, until I see one down year from the Kansas City Chiefs with those two names on calling shots, and then of course a quarterback. So not yet. And you always get that feeling that all the heat that Travis Kelce has faced this week about, all of these armchair experts saying that Travis Kelce isn't focused on football. You might want to think about Travis Kelce adding him to your starting fantasy roster this week. You just get that feeling that the guy's going to come through. But I'm not going to predict a KC downfall until I see one.
Let's jump into the college game. Let's go out to College Station. That's where Illinois is going to be visiting, and they take on the Penn State Nittany Lions. This is the Saturday 6:30 game on Fox. Penn State, an 18.5-point favorite over the team that just beat Nebraska, over under at 47.5.
Yeah, here's a nice little number for you guys. The Nittany Lions are now 19-5 against the spread. Their last 24 as a favorite. They win by an average score of 39-13 in those 24 games. The average line is 19, so right about where this is. And James Franklin, telling you what, man, 44-23-1 against the spread is double-digit chalk. He beats up on the teams that they are supposed to beat. You look back at what the Nittany Lions have done thus far, and I think they're a playoff team, no doubt, but they struggled against Bowling Green, but the Falcons are a pretty good football team. They just took A&M to the wire. Illinois looked mediocre. We talked about it last week against Kansas. They lucked out. They weren't that great against Central Mich. They gave up 330 yards rushing on about 5 yards per pop against CMU and Kansas combined. Then all of a sudden they come out and they just completely shut down Nebraska's ground game. And that has as much to do with Nebraska, I think, as it does with this Illinois team. They only ran for 2.3 yards per carry against the Jayhawks. They caught, I don't know, and maybe you guys, maybe this isn't true, but I've heard some people, and I kind of half believe it, say that Nebraska got caught reading the press clippings before this game. Their defense got totally outcoached. I see Rob frowning on that, and I can't wait to hear you talk about it, because those are things that have been said out here in the Southwest and on the West Coast. Not necessarily agree with that. But here's the thing. Nebraska made defensive blunders and errors covering the pass. They were just not playing well. And you don't see that hardly at all from this Nebraska defense. Penn State's not making those mistakes. They're too damn good. So I actually like Penn State laying all those points this week, guys.
Wow. That's a big spread. When I see numbers like that, I get scared, right? So
and I like Altmaier, by the way, and I like Bielema. I mean, obviously they did a great job coaching and playing last week, but I think Penn State's too strong for them this week.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think Penn State's a really good team. I worry a little bit. I mean, you talk about Nebraska reading the press clippings. God, guys were out of position. I really worry about them in terms of, like, you've got a new defensive backs coach. How well is that guy meshing up with Tony White? I mean, I worry a little bit that there's some communication and coaching cohesiveness that may not be happening, that was happening last year. I mean, the other thing, and I don't know, maybe there's kind of the whole A beats B, B beats C, therefore A should beat C kind of thing going on here.
Syllogism, Dr. Rob, syllogism.
I mean, so the game I'm looking at here, so Northern Iowa went and played Hawaii.
got smoked.
Got destroyed. I think they had like 40, like the Rainbow Warriors held them to like 40 yards total rush.
I talked to Coach Farley this morning, and he goes, I'm not going to make excuses, but the flight and everything, and it took them like 2 days to get there. He goes, and they were all sick. I mean, you could hear it in Coach Farley's voice. He had the flu. Some other guys had the flu. That's not an excuse.
And I get it. That plays into it. I'm just like, if you really go back and look, Northern Illinois moved the ball in Nebraska and controlled clock.
Mm-hmm.
They did. That's what their goal was. They did a good job of it. They had 40 yards on the ground against Hawaii. I'm a little worried, because is that a little bit of an indication that, hey, maybe Nebraska's defense isn't quite clicking like it was last year. All of a sudden, everybody's got film on Tony White and the 3-3-5 and what it can do. And now teams kind of have a little bit of a playbook in terms of how to attack it. And did Illinois exploit that? Or did Nebraska? I'm not saying you're wrong, Scott. Maybe maybe they did believe their own press clippings and they're a better team than what we saw. It's just, I don't think Illinois is a bad team at all. I think they exposed some things at Nebraska. I'll be surprised if Penn State covers the spread, because I do think Illinois is a very good team.
I don't disagree with Illinois being a good team and a well-coached team. And I do like Altmaier a lot. I like him more than I thought I would. He's a heady guy. I like his demeanor on the sideline. When his defense gave up a couple of big plays to Nebraska, I'm watching him on the sideline, and he looks like he's being cool. He's not being a jerk, so don't get me wrong. But his head looks like it's going to explode, because he's like, my gosh, let's make this stop. And there was a fumble in there somewhere, and he had that look on his face. He looks like a real good leader. And then, of course, Bielema, you can't take anything away from Bielema. He just does a good job wherever he goes.
Take a sandwich away from him.
What's that?
Take a sandwich away from him.
Well, I've seen him.
Look at Trav. Okay, Trav loses a bunch of weight. Now you think you can go body shame people?
Come on, he's hard not to body shame, right?
I agree. He's fatter than hell. He's the next Mangino, but it's like this show is supposed to be a safe space.
Well, we used to say when
Mangino
and Bielema were invited to banquets, we always used to tell them, these guys are going to want seconds. Let's be prepared,
Hey, let's dive into our next game. We're going to the SEC. You got Kentucky visiting Ole Miss. Ole Miss keeps moving up the polls. And, of course, at 11 o'clock on ABC, you can watch a high-powered Lane Kiffin offense, which is on track to make the playoffs. My daughter lives in Oxford. She works at Ole Miss. So the 17, I like Ole Miss minus the 17 here.
Great place, by the way. A buddy of mine, his kid just enrolled this past month at Ole Miss. That's where he's going to be going to college. Yep. But anyway, as far as this game is concerned, you're looking again at that line being where it is right now, around 17, total around 53. The Circa here in Las Vegas loves to get out in front of other books when it comes to setting lines. They made this number 20. Before anybody else jumped in and made numbers. So it's down to 17, including at the Circa. They've been like 17 and a half. And it made me think about this when I saw the games we were going to talk about a handicapping tool that we haven't talked about, I don't think this year, but we have in past seasons, about learning to make your own lines well before you've seen anybody else's. So it deals with making power ratings, things of that nature. And I made Ole Miss before last week's game. You got to make them a week in advance. Like, for instance, tonight, guys, when I get done with this show, I'm going to make my lines for next week's games before this weekend's games are played. So last week before the games, I made Ole Miss 15.5 on a neutral field against Kentucky. So now you got to apply home field advantage and decide what you think home field advantage is for the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, if you look at Kentucky, they took it to Ole Miss, they took it to Ohio, but the offense scored a total of 18 combined points against South Carolina and against the Georgia Bulldogs. 183 yards on less than 3 yards per play against South Carolina, little less than 4 yards per play against Georgia. I thought the defense played well against Georgia, no doubt about it, but they just had no offense to help out that defense. You look at their quarterback, 58% passer, 3 touchdowns, that's it, 2 picks. He went 17 for 37 for 144 yards combined against South Carolina and Georgia. That's it. 8.5 completions per game against those two, 72 yards per game. What's Ole Miss allowing? 1 yard per carry, less than 6 points per game. I know this is a step up for Ole Miss from what they played thus far. I think Ole Miss gets the job done. I'm not willing to say everybody should run out there and plunk their money down on it. I think Penn State's a good bet. I think Ole Miss, though, is more of a lean or an opinion. But again, the circa's really good at opening numbers. And then when other books come in and they're 2, 3, 4 points off circa, most of the time, or a lot of times, that circa number was closer to being right. And again, they set this number at 20. Everybody else set it around 17.
Scott, real quick, so people may understand, or I don't want you to go through a big mathematical formula, but how do you set your own line? Is it gut, or how much do you? What does it take to set your own line?
You froze up on me there, Travis, but I caught the tail end. Did you ask me how to set up your own line? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of the metrics we talked about last year, and maybe we should start talking about them again next week, go into this. Obviously, like yards per point, both offensively and defensively. I'm looking at that stuff. Quality of opponent. Obviously, if you're gaining a ton of yards against the 134th ranked team in football, it's not the same as it is if you're going up against the 35th team in college football. But yards per point, offensively and defensively, mixed in with some of the things we talked about, how your defense plays, yards allowed when the opponent gets inside the 40 or across midfield. Same with your offense, the kind of points you score compared to the number of times you cross midfield or get inside your opponent's 40. For me, that all goes into the mix. And it takes time. I mean, you got to really become good at this. And at that point, especially in the NFL, college changes all the time, but especially in the NFL, I mean, you're almost got to, by week 4, you've got that in your brain. It's like second nature of how much maybe you should knock down a team or raise a team up in the power ratings. And for me, from week 1 to 2, you might make a big change in your power rating. Florida State would be an example. But week 6, week 7, week 8, those power ratings all of a sudden barely change, half point here or there from week to week. So there is kind of a science to it. I think Dr. Rob in another life would have been really into this kind of stuff with all the statistics. He probably would have had a hell of a set of power ratings. But that's
I do love the nuts and bolts of this. I tell everybody every time it's the most informative show out there.
And you like math. I don't like math, so I would have been really bad at it. By the way, guys,
we are from Iowa.
That's fair. We are worldwide. Dr. Rob watching you guys from Brisbane, Australia tonight. Actually, what the hell time is it in Brisbane? Is
18 hours ahead of me. What are they, 16 hours ahead of you?
Wow. Sending you a bag of umbrellas to put all those fruity beers you drink in. Huskers by 21 this weekend.
I got a question for Jonathan.
Okay, I gotta tell you guys something here. Quick story. So my buddy Jonathan here. So Jonathan was an All-American swimmer for Nebraska when I was in school. Jonathan is from Edinburgh, Scotland.
Wow.
But lives in Australia now. Went to college in the United States. He exclusively drinks beer, like the yards of beer, those giant long glasses.
Oh,
Does he drink Foster's, Australian for beer?
Well, he likes those heavy Scottish ales.
I want to know a question, and I hope he answers. Who's winning the grand final this week? I think it's Saturday night.
Jonathan, ball in your court. Let's hear it, buddy.
Call me
stupid.
Need a
prediction.
What's the grand final?
Aussie rules football, brother.
Oh my! Do you bet Aussie rules? Do you bet Aussie rules football?
I've been known to dabble.
You have a problem. You 1-800-bets-off is what I'm going to tell you to call.
He does this for a living.
I get that.
I want to know
Mark.
what Jonathan likes, and then I'm going to start my handicap with what he says.
Let's dive into the marquee game of the weekend, and this is the big one. It's going to be everyone's watching on ABC at 6:30 on Saturday night. Georgia, number 2 in the country, taking on Alabama. They're going to Bryant-Denny Stadium. Bulldogs a 1.5-point favorite. Over/under on this at 48.5.
Yeah, and by the way, if I interrupt you guys tonight or look like I'm sitting here and you throw something to me, it's because I keep losing you guys a little bit once in a while here. I'm not ignoring you.
It's your router tonight. It's not mine.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I only pay $3,000 a month. I'm joking.
Neither of you guys have frozen up on me yet.
Nobody's frozen up on me yet either, so we're good.
Oh, it's all me, man. It's Vegas.
It is.
But, maybe we're not paying our bills after all. But anyway.
You had a bad week last week. Okay, we get
Actually,
it.
It was a good week. They should have shut it off after week 1 of the NFL. Anyway, Georgia and Bama. Last week, speaking about power ratings, I made Georgia 4.5 on a neutral field. So this number's pretty good. Sitting at 1.5 at Alabama. And maybe I'm shortchanging Bama's, home field advantage a little bit here. Last week, Georgia only had 2 scoring drives of 60-plus yards. Their other scoring drives went 4 plays for 7 yards, and then a field goal. Kentucky held Georgia to 262 yards on 4.8 yards per play. We don't see that too much when it comes to the Georgia Bulldogs over the years since Kirby Smart's been in Athens. They gained 131 yards. Check this out. Georgia gained 131 yards on 21 plays on 2 possessions. That added up to 10 points. The rest of the game, Georgia had 8 possessions. They gained 109 yards on 3 yards per play. I mean, they were shut down for 80% of their possessions last week. And as far as Jalen Milroe is concerned, he's only faced Georgia once, talking about the Alabama QB. That was last year's conference championship. And he was fine. He made no costly mistakes, 13 of 23, couple touchdowns, no picks. That tied defense last year held Georgia to 78 yards rushing on less than 3 yards per carry, and they're not running the ball right now. Here's the thing, though. Bama hasn't faced quality defense yet. They struggled with South Florida well into the fourth quarter. 3-point or 6-point game. We saw what South Florida did against Miami. They got smoked. Wisconsin lost their starting quarterback. We didn't like Wisconsin that much anyway, but he started 5 for 5 before he got hurt. So I looked at this defense for Georgia. Here's one of those metrics. SP+. Georgia's defense is 3rd in the nation in what we call SP+. And SP+ is a metric that is described as a tempo and an opponent-adjusted measure of college football efficiency. Simple as that. So if they can get Michael Williams back this week, he has the ankle injury, last I saw, questionable. I really think Kirby sends the heat on defense and tries to mess things up a little bit for Alabama. So this is not, again, I've had Penn State, which I think is a play. The Chargers, wait until you find out a little bit more about their tackles. If at least one of them can play, it's a play. But like the last game I talked about, this is a lean more than anything else. Georgia, the best thing I can tell you about this game, if you look at the title of the contest, it's missing an A. It said Georgia against Alabama. But anyway, having said that, I do think it's a lean on Georgia. I think their defense is going to be too tough. And they've been lowered a little bit value-wise because of that game against Kentucky.
Hey, just to let you know, you ask Scott and you shall receive. Jonathan says Lions in a thriller. Last 10 minutes by 3. There you go.
I love it. Listen, so it comes on at like 10:30, 11 o'clock my time out here in Vegas Friday night. I will be watching. And on Jonathan's suggestion, I might be involved. So there you go.
I like it. All right,
last stuff right there.
Last game we have is Nebraska at Purdue. The Huskers coming off their first loss of the season, taking on the Boilermakers, which are not good. I mean, their lone win is against Indiana State. It's an 11 o'clock game on Peacock. They threw it on Peacock because they need to sell subscriptions. And that's the only thing I can think. Nebraska, 10-point favorite. You're over under at 46.5 here.
I'm a little bit concerned about what Doc Rob said about, I noticed it as a person just watching the game, as a Cornhusker fan last week, watching guys a couple of times turning the wrong way on defense, talking about the DBs. And now I hear, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to watch your guys' shows this week. I try not to watch them before we talk because I don't want to just repeat everything Doc Rob says and what you say, Travis. And I respect you guys both so much on your ability to see what's going on.
Stop kissing our ass.
Well,
Stop
I'm waiting for that, never mind, I won't say it. But anyway, I do. I've watched you guys, usually after we do the show. And so I can't wait to watch, but I could see it, a couple of the guys that were not in the right place on defense. Rob just mentioned it earlier in the show. And that does worry you. Having said that, and having known that Nebraska's 8-31 in their last 39 one-score games, and it's been talked about all over the place. I mean, this team's a couple of plays away per game of 31-8 in one-score games. The good news, as one article stated, and I agree, this is not likely to be a one-score game this week. I mean, Purdue was overvalued before the season began. They were only a 7-point dog to Notre Dame, and they got beat 66-7. They lose by 17 to Oregon State. They've now given up 703 yards rushing on almost 7 yards per carry the last two games. I don't think you shore that up in 1 week. Their offense stinks, 44% passing the last 2 weeks. I don't care what they did in the opener against Indiana State. 90 passing yards per game the last 2 weeks, 4.4 yards per pass, more interceptions than touchdowns. I think this is just what the doctor ordered, and I'm not talking about Doc Rob here, for Nebraska to right the ship. And I'm not saying that they're going to go on and win a bunch of games, and what happened last week, is something they can overcome against really good opponents like Ohio State, maybe Wisconsin and Iowa. But I think they get by Purdue by a couple of touchdowns at least. Purdue's that bad. And I also wanted to say, you know what? I'm not shocked that Nebraska lost, even though I liked them last week. I had Nebraska going 8-4 before the season began. I still think they're kind of an 8-4 team, and next year is the year.
Well, Rob, you had them at what, 6-6, 7-5?
I'd 7-5.
Yeah.
I think I had 7
8-4.
wins. I had 7 wins on the season.
Yeah, I think I went.
And I had
8-4
Illinois as a loss.
You did. I will give you that. I will concede that. It was weird watching Matt Rule this week, but he seemed a little dejected, almost shell-shocked. Did you think that, Rob, when you watched his news conference? It was just like,
I think he feels like I think he feels like this was a mental letdown game, that there was a failure on the part of the coaches from a preparation standpoint. There was a failure on the part of players to execute. And I mean, in some of the stuff we went over, I do worry a little bit about some of the stuff about you've got a new defensive backs coach. How well are those guys meshing up right now in terms of the on-field productivity? But I think he was disappointed in how they played. And the other thing is you saw they reverted to these mistakes that have cost them the penalties, special teams, miscues, and turnovers. I mean, that's kind of been the Zadiska mantra the last several years, that the stuff that absolutely haunts them. And if you take away one special teams miscue, Nebraska wins the game. You take away one turnover, Nebraska wins the game. You take away any 1 or 2 penalties, a couple of those 15-yarders, Nebraska wins the game. That's painful as a coach to have to go through and look at and realize we had this list of 6, 7, 8, 9 plays that are just sloppy mistakes. And any 1 or 2 of them, if those are corrected, we can still make the other 6 or 7 mistakes. But if we fix 1 or 2 of them, we win the game. Well, you lost the game. That
pitch and catch in the end zone in the first half, I believe at the time it was tied, and then they ended up scoring the next possession after Illinois had a possession, Nebraska, to go up 17-10. But, 2 possessions earlier, Illinois' possession and Nebraska's, you get the pass in the end zone. That's right on target. It's caught, and a fantastic play made by an Illinois defensive back takes the ball away from him. And it was the right call. I didn't think so at first. And when he started slowing it down, I'm like, that's absolutely the right call. If he can hold on to that, wrestle it away, they go up 17-10. They stopped Illinois the next time out, the next possession, got the ball back, went right down the field and scored again. That's a different ball game. So it's just little details that are still haunting the Huskers because those little details come up 4 or 5 times a game in key situations.
Does that make it tough to bet on a team? I mean, is that where you just sit back and go, I can't trust this team?
Yeah, I mean, I want to bet Nebraska this week, but it's like
I would never.
That's the problem. It's like, got to prove it. A lot of guys said last week, got to prove it. I did a free video on Nebraska last week. Thought they were in a spot to win and cover. I think we talked about it here. I thought they'd win by 10 to 14 points, and then I had people saying, Scott, remember what you always say? They got to prove it, and they still do. They still have to prove it. So on the road, laying 10, conference game. Purdue stinks, but do I want to lay the points with Nebraska? No. I do think they win by 10 to 14 points.
Hey, if you want to work with Scott, you can do so. Text the word Doc Talk to the number 29022 and get a free $60 trial of the premium member picks from Scott, or visit DocSports.com and sign up for the free 60 on the upper left hand of the website. And Scott's brutally honest. He'll tell you when he does well. He tells you when he does bad. What would you say, 5-2 last week? Not bad.
Yeah, we went 5-2, hit the top play on the Detroit Lions, which was nice. They were out in the Southwest against Arizona. First week of college, which was the last Saturday of August, because I didn't play week 0 or whatever it was called. Played the last Saturday of August, and I lost. Since then, we've won the first 2 Saturdays of September in college, and then came out last week and went 3-1. NFL lost the first 2 weeks, came back last week and picked up about 7 units. Or no, it's less than about 5 units last week in the NFL, hit the top play. And I was telling before you came on, Rob, that I've got to exercise discipline because I should not be playing the NFL week 1. I hate the NFL in week 1. And I did it again and I lost. And so, again, as the season gets a little bit deeper, we've been able to win as we get deeper into the season. I got to show you something. Because this thing right here, which is actually heavier than it looks, I still keep behind me. Very proud of it. That was for the Las Vegas Invitational. I lost the first 2 weeks of the NFL, came back and hit over 60% for the season. So I'm bragging right now. The picture behind me, I had a couple of people asking me on a video I did earlier this week, what's that picture above the footballs? Well, there's a Nebraska football there. There's a Bodog.com football there. And then above me, that's Johnny the Jet Rogers punt return in the game of the century, believe it or not.
There we go.
Against Oklahoma. So I still got my Husker stuff hanging around.
Look at you. Well, hey, tell you what, if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, Behind the Point Spread is a good reason to subscribe, because you're going to know when we go live, which is we moved it a day because Dr. Rob had to pick up his wife at the airport last night, and he was a busy dude, and he's a good husband. You are a good husband, Rob. I just thought I'd let you know that. He's like, maybe not. But we're going to return to our regular Wednesday program next week, 8 o'clock Central. So be ready for that. For Scott Spreitzer, for Dr. Rob Zadiska, I'm Travis Justice. We'll talk to you next week on Behind the Point Spread, presented by Doc Talk Sports.